certainly two of the businesses that I've worked with, which were doing high value projects, were taking fairly sizable deposit payments from clients, and not understanding that that isn't revenue yet. That actually should be on the balance sheet as deferred income, and it's a liability. So if you're spending that cash before you've done the work to realise it, you could face a real problem in 3, 6, 9 months' time. And that certainly was the scenario with two of the businesses that I got involved with.
Turnarounds are not won in spreadsheets. They are won in the first 30 days with clarity, cash discipline, and a team that actually pulls in the same direction. Today's guest builds that kind of momentum for a living. Jon Corns is an award-winning interim fractional MD and the founder of JRC Business Consulting. Jon, welcome to the Director First show. Thanks for joining us, pal.
Pleasure. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
And I got that in one, didn't I? I definitely thought I was going to mess up that intro. So, you know, your background, you as an engineer, now you're not just an interim MD, you are an award-winning interim MD. So could you just sort of fill in the blanks for us and give us a potted history of your career?
Absolutely. So graduated, as you say, with a degree, predominantly specialising in manufacturing engineering. Realised quite quickly, though, that I like the idea of being out and about. Being chained to a desk was not for me in the same environment 9 till 5. So I started my career functionally in sales as a sales engineer. So still that industrial product or service, but the first decade of my career was predominantly in large PLCs, transitioning through the sales functions. But what that did give me was a commercial astuteness and awareness. And I was lucky. I was fortunate enough to be identified as high potential in the organizations I worked for. So I did get invested in. That allowed me to try and use those skills. And then I moved into business unit leadership and ultimately MDing roles. Again, MDing on behalf of large PLCs, but I was typically MD in the UK operation, which was normally anywhere between 20 and 30 million in revenue, but circa 100 to 200 full-time employees. And that's what introduced me to balance sheet and P&L responsibility and accountability. Towards the end of my employed career, I came out of that PLC environment, which was a great grounding and learning, but ultimately PLCs have a lot of governance, and that governance is there to protect the share price. And what it does do is actually restrict them from being quick at rapid prototyping. Things like AI, the larger PLCs will always be the later companies to embrace that because of that corporate governance around protecting share price.
Leveled the playing field a bit, hasn't it?
It has. But that's why I then moved into privately owned again. So the last employed role I had was actually for a privately owned business that had acquired an organisation in the UK, and I took on the responsibility for MD in that UK organisation, but also really driving the integration, bringing it into the single entity, and that included things like ERP systems, changing banks to it was a group bank, realigning financial years, as well as obviously achieving the growth agenda that company had in mind as well, having made the acquisition. So that was the next 10 years, and that took me to 2020, which was the point where I started, like many people of my age, to question the value they're adding. Yeah, I'd reassured myself I'd been making decisions that I was paid to, particularly working for American PLCs, who are all about results this quarter. And I realised that I'd got a skill set and a toolkit that I had been the beneficiary of that I really wasn't utilising effectively. And that's why I reached out into doing my own thing originally as a business advisor or a business coach. And I wanted to start sharing that skill set with solopreneurs, SME business owners. 18 months of doing that, though, made me realise that these guys are being dragged out of their comfort zone. They've got a coach or an advisor because they're normally being or trying to do something that they've not experienced before. And it doesn't matter how much you try and advise them or coach them or mentor them through that, they're still being stretched into an experience that either they're apprehensive about, they're not comfortable doing, they don't know how to go about it. And that's when I started to, I call it get on the pitch and do it for them. And that was hence the transition into the interim and the fractional work is actually, why don't you let me do it for you? I've got the knocks and the bruises and the experience. Some of it can be unpleasant, particularly when it's in a turnaround situation. So I can come in, I can be the person who can deliver it quickly for you, can execute it based on the knocks and bruises that I had through my career, and ultimately leave the business as stable and in a position where either they can take over or probably more frequently, they then employ a full-time permanent successor to take it from me onto the next phase of whatever its journey might be.
You mentioned about some of the larger companies invested in you when you was younger. They saw something in you. What did that look like? What investments were made? Where was the where was the education, the best bits you got? Where did that come from?
Predominantly external trainers. So some of the larger blue chips like Korn Ferry, globally recognized. Some of them had particularly strong in-house training and development. I think I was fortunate that a couple of senior leaders within these large corporates also recognized the potential and took me under their wing a bit as mentors. So that was great. As an example, one of the most challenging experiences I had was a presence and impact masterclass, where for 2 days I was just being videoed all day with video playback on. Why are you holding your cup of coffee like that? What message do you think that body language is giving off? And it was quite a brutal experience. After day one, I went to bed licking wounds and feeling pretty bruised. Fortunately, day two, they built you back up and equipped me to you. And the thing with training is lots of people go through it. What I think differentiates the people who succeed with it is they go away and they try and apply it. And I think that's what made the difference with me. So many people in corporate world will get access to training, but they'll just put it on their CV as a tick box or it's there as a reason to go and get the next job. I think if you're the beneficiary of it and you apply it, then you've got opportunities to demonstrate that you're worth investing in.
Sorry.
No, I was going to say that there's an old saying, isn't there? Knowledge is power. I don't subscribe to that. In fact, I think it's BS. I think applied knowledge can be extremely powerful.
Obviously, it's going to be very hard to distill 2 days of learning about how to hold yourself into, 20, 30 seconds. But can you share? That's fascinating. I've got my cup of tea here. What were the takeaways from that type of training you took on?
Because that was aimed at P&L leaders of the future. It was about, as I say, it was called Presence and Impact because it was about how do you present and portray yourself as a leader, and more importantly, how do you get your message across? There's lots of presentation skills courses out there, but traditionally they go through, this is how you structure a PowerPoint, this is the content, this is how you engage your audience. This was much more about how do you come across as an individual. And for me, the key learnings were actually when you are stood up as a figurehead, the audience isn't willing you to do poorly. Actually, they want to be able to empathize with you and build a relationship with you, and they want to see you do well. So for me, it took a lot of the nervousness that we all get to a degree when you're stood up in front of an audience, particularly when you're a leader, you're quite often having to present some form of unpalatable or unpleasant news on occasion. So for me, it was about how can I humanize it a little bit more so people can relate to me and build that empathy. And then and the fact that they're not willing me to do poorly, in fact, they're willing me to do well, allowed me just to relax a bit. And as a result, what it did for me was allow me to speak off the cuff a lot more easily when I was dealing with employees. And again, it helps now because quite often I'm parachuted into a business with no personal relationships built. And very
Oh, good. Come
quickly,
to
I've got
that,
to
yeah.
establish credibility and build relationship. Normally, when people are very standoffish about why is he here, what's his intent, is he the hatchet man? So there's a natural barrier that comes up. And I think that was one of the great learnings for me that I'm able to implement today in what I do.
Yeah, I was going to come to that a little bit later on, because you must have, that's what people's view must be some days. You know, this guy is going to come in, he's going to cut costs, he's going to, you know, he's the, like you say, the hatchet man. How do you get over that then? You know, because surely you're walking into a business and to a degree, listen, I really understand that. Sometimes we've got to get on site. People know who we are, and it's difficult. I find it really difficult. How do you handle that? Walking in and they're all thinking one thing, and you know, how does that play out in your head?
For me, it's about communication, and it's a big word, isn't it? Everyone talks about communication, but for me, the key things of communication are candor and respect. So if I'm on site, generally people know I'm there because there's a problem or there's a reason. Quite often I am a secret until the day I land on site. With the majority of employees, it's only the leadership or the shareholders or the board who engage me who know I'm going to be there. So suddenly I turn up as this presence, and people are naturally guarded but are nervous. So I think one of the first things I do to establish credibility is give them a little bit of my background. You know, that's kind of my right to be there, if you like. But also, I don't dance away from the subject matter. So I will generally say to people, again, with shareholder or board approval on what they want communicated, but I'll tell people the reason why I'm there, how I see the journey playing out, how I need them to come and participate, and the roles I expect them to play. And then it's the one-off meeting doesn't really allay that fear. It's what you do after it. You know, you then have to be accessible and open to people to come and talk to you about their fears and their aspirations, predominantly their fears. But for me, it's about regular communication as well. And that for me is a weekly town hall. One of the things that I find very effective is what I call short interval management. So daily huddles, daily meetings around some of the key metrics. Because by nature of a business being in a distressed position, everyone knows there's a trouble area. Yeah, if people think that their employees are blind to it, I'm afraid they're sadly mistaken, because employees will engage with suppliers and they'll start hearing whispers if suppliers are not being paid on time or on hold, or customers as well are slow to pay their invoices. All of these external stakeholders do have multiple routes into the business, and the employees, if they're not told the truth, quite often will come to their own conclusions, and their own conclusions normally are exaggerated or wildly off.
Mm-hmm. No, I get it. It's it's an interesting role. I mean, what's your general placement time? Because obviously, interim, you're in and out. What would the normal tenure be?
I guess the average is 6 to 9 months. So I've talked about quick impact. You know, I'd expect to see impact in first 8 weeks, but a typical tenure is 6 to 9 months. Occasionally they roll over a bit longer in a slightly bigger organization. Was lucky and did one shorter, but that was less turnaround and more an integration project, which I was able to get done in 3 to 4 months.
I mean, I'm going to save this question towards the end, but I want to get it off my chest now. And it's like, you've had a fairly varied and illustrious career, but sort of since you started on your own in 2020, what are the sort of key, the really key lessons, the biggest lessons that you've took from your career that you can share with people?
Financial understanding. I think again, in the large PLCs, you're lucky. You've got FP&A departments, you've got CFOs, FDs. So whilst you have the accountability, there are decisions such as CapEx decisions, which are always going to go to the global board. And you've got in-depth analysis, good reporting, charts of accounts that are already well structured. I think it's the financial astuteness of a lot of these smaller businesses, which is really what starts to cause them problems. Things like cash accounting, for example, rather than accrual accounting. A lot of SME business owners can sleep well when they see that there's enough cash in the bank. Certainly two of the businesses that I've worked with, which were doing high value projects, were taking fairly sizable deposit payments from clients. And not understanding that that isn't revenue yet. That actually should be on the balance sheet as deferred income, and it's a liability. So if you're spending that cash before you've done the work to realise it, you could face a real problem in 3, 6, 9 months' time. And that certainly was the scenario with two of the businesses that I got involved with. They'd taken that cash, they'd utilised it, and with one particularly where the majority of their clients were large insurance companies, they were taking as much as 50% of the project up front as a deposit payment, but the rest was coming upon completion. So if you've spent that cash and then you've got a project to deliver, which can take 6 to 12 months, you've got a long period of time coming before you're going to get the second part of that cash.
See it all the time. See it all the time in sort of what I do. You know, they're living on that next job to get that deposit in, to deal with some messes from before. Now, what I like to dig in as well, because we have people, UK business owners, watch or listen to our podcasts. They are generally from your SMEs to people with multi-million pound turnovers, and we speak to them and they don't have an understanding of the finances. There's no finance function. So cash versus accrual, please explain it to us in the most simplest terms. So someone listening to this goes, I get what Jon's saying. Okay,
so for me, the simplest way I can articulate it is cash accounting is purely putting through your management accounts all of the inflow and outflow of cash in the month. So
the most basic you'll have
in the most basic form, So it's all of the sales that you invoice in that period. So if we assume a period is a single month, you're invoicing out, or you're collecting the cash from the sales you've invoiced out, and you show that as your revenue. That's probably the easiest. Where it starts to get confusing is all of the invoices you receive and pay in that month is what people show as their cost of goods sold. The reality is, in that period, particularly if you're manufacturing or you're doing something with a product, that invoice relates to a purchase, which was something that you're going to invoice next month once you've finished the build of it, or it's a late invoice for something that you invoiced in a prior period. And this for me is the importance, because if you are not matching up those purchases to the month in which you realized the sale, you're not seeing the true gross margin or gross profit.
Never quite accurate, is it? Yeah,
never quite accurate. Not. And this is where I see a lot of businesses start to get confused, because this doesn't bite businesses quickly. What tends to happen is it comes up over time and the warning signs are ignored, and suddenly business owners are saying, well, I'm not doing anything different. I can't understand why I'm not getting the same financial performance that I used to get. And normally it's as businesses grow, they can't keep such a tight control or understanding on everything, and they're not getting the quality of reporting to show them what's really happening. And the last assignment I had is a classic example where the gross margin eroded from 53% to 35%. And the owners are saying, I don't understand why the margin's gone. We're passing on price increases. We're operating in the same way that we used to, but because they were cash accounting rather than accrual accounting, they weren't seeing the true margin they were making by customer, by product type or revenue stream. And what they failed to pick up was they'd stopped to put some of the items they were using on the bill of materials when they were pricing jobs. The other thing that they were doing is they were using the lowest cost price that they could purchase goods for as the cost price to apply. Well, they thought it was margin, and the difference between margin and markup are two very different things as well that people fail to understand. So they were actually applying a 40% markup on the lowest price that they could buy something for, But if that supplier let them down, they were having to go and buy it elsewhere, and they were probably buying it at a higher price than they'd quoted. So again, there's margin erosion.
Financial understanding. Love that you're talking about that. That is probably, for me, in insolvency, when we're taking someone through an insolvency, and a lot of directors will do some type of pre-pack, and they want to start again, that there's something in amongst the business that's decent. But one of the things that I try and drill into clients is say, right, listen, what's gone wrong here? Where are the holes in the buckets? What's going to happen differently next time? And it's almost always like they're driving their business blind. Like either they don't get financial reporting on a monthly basis, they do, but it's wrong, or in the worst scenario, this is that their only financial reporting is year-end compliance accounts. And you're just like
I see that very often.
Frightening.
Yeah, and
frightening.
So I'm trying to pick my words carefully. I don't have an issue with compliance accountants because the role that they play is really important. I have a concern when your external compliance accountant is doing your monthly management reporting for you.
Yeah.
Because the chart of accounts for compliance is very different from the chart of accounts that I would like to see for running a business. And again, in the arena that I operate in industrial and manufacturing, quite often people are using subcontractors or they're paying overtime on labour. Compliance accounting would wrap all those costs up as direct wages. Now, I like to see those lines separated out because overtime, particularly, who's approving it? Is it being authorised before it's done and it's a known entity and therefore we know it's going to drive revenue? Or is it actually a symptom of a business problem and therefore it's eroding margin again? Subcontractor costs tend to be higher than if we've got our own labour that we could use for it. Mm-hmm. So I think that for me, I like to see more detail in the management accounts monthly. I think the other mistake that I see is the time it takes to shut ledgers and get those management accounts published. Mm-hmm. All too often you see them in week 4 of the month after the month you're reporting on. So in the businesses that I operate in, I always try and get ledgers closed 4 working days after month end, management accounts published by 7 working days, because that gives you a chance of actually understanding, if I make this, and this decision, then this month I can see this result. And for me, that's the skill in managing a P&L. It's not being able to understand the numbers and what they've told me historically. It's understanding, well, based on that, if I pull this lever, and this lever, then that bottom number, which is the all-important number, is going to look like this next month. And this is where I'm always looking at some key ratios, and that ratio is fundamental, because if it's 10% plus, then it's fair to say your business model is healthy at producing cash. How you manage the cash then is a different question, but there's nothing wrong with the business model. If the business model is giving you a 4 or 5% return on your sales, then I would say that you need to take a look at the business model. Unless it's high volume retail type sales where it is about volume and churn, then I think potentially you will hit a cash pinch point at some point on such a low return on sales.
So financial understanding was one key lesson.
Yes.
What else?
Understanding the importance of building winning teams is the corporate phrase, I guess. But
let's get into that. Yeah, really interesting.
One of the key things that I always took away from that was a leader that I respected an awful lot told me once, you can only be as good as the people that you have around you. Mm-hmm. And it's true. Even when I have impact and success, it's not down to me. It's down to me removing the barriers to enable other people to be successful. Because the majority of the time when I go into a business, there is talent there, there's capability. It might be stifled, it might be disengaged, it might be demotivated, but there is talent that you can rely on. And I don't believe anybody goes to work with the intent of doing a bad job. No. Maybe some do. There's the odd exception to prove every rule wrong. But for me, you have to bring people on that journey with you and empower them, and then also hold them accountable to what you want them to do. But unless you can explicitly articulate that and give them a framework around, this is what I expect from you, this is your level of decision-making authority, autonomy, before you need to come to somebody else, and this is how often we're going to talk about your progress, then people tend to operate blind. And more often than not, they come in with the best of intent, but because they don't see the bigger picture or understand what they're contributing to, they will go off on a tangent, or they'll over-process things. I've seen people who are putting data that's in the ERP system into an Excel spreadsheet to give them their own peace of mind that it's accurate and they're doing it correctly. But it's just duplication.
John, I do that. I've got a CRM, right? And, you know, like, I don't know what it is about me, but I also do, you know, like for like revenues, or I've got an Excel spreadsheet, and people, why do you do that? I'm just like, oh, just leave me alone. Just do that. but I've got HubSpot. HubSpot's perfect, but it's just like that. Yeah.
And for me, that's where inefficiency creeps in, when you get people who are doing their own thing. I mean, and for you, if that's how you sleep at night, then I wouldn't say stop it.
It's a waste of time. And I'll do it on a Friday. Every Friday, I set about 45 minutes looking at everything that's come into the business. It's really the marketing machine behind the business. You know, what's a referral? What's come on from organic? Blah, blah, blah. What are we spending on Google Ads, Meta? But, you know, what's the cost per acquisition? And I just have this spreadsheet that I like, but the CRM does exactly the same thing, and it's like I say, it's probably wasted half an hour, but it just gives me that. Oh,
it's a comfort blanket, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
a waste of time, actually, bad. That's the thing.
But if you imagine you've got 20 employees who are all doing that to a degree on their own, and it's easy to see how processes fall apart, get broken, or don't get followed, and this is where I just think people need some clear roles and responsibilities, and take away the ambiguity of what you expect from them, and then provide regular feedback, and that feedback is both positive, but also, I just believe in, you know, if you see behaviors that aren't desirable, you tackle it there and then it doesn't become a big issue. Modern day and age, you know, it's normally people on mobile phones too much. It's not a problem if you just say, excuse me, sorry, pop that down, the phone's ringing there, that's a priority. Whereas if you tend to stew on it and fester, it turns into a disciplinary and a warning, and it creates ill feeling. And so I think,
I get it.
You know, just if you see behaviors that aren't acceptable, as I say, address them there and then. The rest of the employees are also seeing it, so they prefer it because they see it being dealt with. And then the other thing for me is, more often than not, I see business owners try and shoulder too much of the responsibility, and it varies with individuals. I've seen it. Some have just got genuine trust problems. You know, they employ people, but they don't trust them with things like invoicing or other business, what they perceive to business critical factors. Well, have checks and balances and governance, but let them do the invoicing, and then you sign off the invoicing before it goes. You know, I don't bring employees in to not trust them to do something, because again, that is counterintuitive to the culture. But typically what I see is, as businesses grow, you add resource to do all the operational tasks, and you end up with and I'm doing this because you end up with a pretty flat org structure. You've got the business owner and maybe a trusted lieutenant or two who are operating at the top, and then you've got this long line of resource doing all the operational work. Unfortunately, as businesses continue to grow, what tends to happen is the leaders get pulled down into those operational day-to-day tasks. Either, can you check this for me? Can you just have a look at this? Or they're correcting mistakes. And they're not giving the employees at this level the opportunity to bridge the gap and start coming up and operating at that more strategic level. And inevitably, the one resource that none of us can actually increase is time. So, you know, this is where I see businesses plateau, as the business owner gets to a point, and it might be, typically this is somewhere between 3 and 7 million in revenue, from my experience. but they just get to a point where they can't break through the glass ceiling and kick it on anymore. And it's because what they've got is this flat structure. They probably haven't invested in automation or systems. So they're still using, whether it's Smartsheet, Excel, or some other manual form of business processing. And what it means is that they just can't do what they should be doing, which is, the best simile I can use is riding a bike. You need one eye looking down the road to make sure that you're going to miss the pedestrian at the crossing or the parked car. And then you need the other eye in front of your front wheel, so you're not about to slide on the wet manhole cover or the piece of gravel. Inevitably, that eye looking further down the road just starts to look straight in front of the front wheel. And that's where they then come to me saying, we don't know how to kick it on. We don't know how to move it forward, because they have no more time to give to their business.
Do you think like sometimes people are reluctant to come in and get an MD, because it's almost saying, listen, here's my baby. I've messed it up a little bit.
Yeah, there's resistance, and I guess there's a scale of it as well. I think there's, to a degree, there's always an element of pride. As you say, this is my legacy, this is my baby, I've built this up, and I don't trust anyone else with it. There's, at the other end of the scale, I see business owners who are, I want an MD. I've had enough. The business has grown to a point where I don't really recognize it anymore, and I don't know how to kick it on. So I just want to step back, employ an MD, and be a CEO or a chairman and take the dividends. I've operated with a lot of business owners at that point. The challenge for me is, as we start on that journey, and that could be with me as an MD or me coaching a succession, so this might be a handover from first to second generation, is they start to see improvements, they start to see the business progressing, but they also start to feel pushed out of it. Mm-hmm. And they start to feel like they're losing control of their own business. Now, that at the start was their original aspiration, but as it starts to become a reality, they try and claw their way back in. That, for whatever reason, they feel like they're losing control, they're feeling undermined, and also because it's their income. It's very hard to trust somebody else with the thing that is going to generate your future income. And that is quite often more detrimental than the guys at the other end of the scale who are reluctant because it's mine and I don't want to let go of it yet. I'm not ready to hand it over to somebody else because I've built this. The guys that I've seen who started that journey and then realized it's not really what I want, I do want to be involved, or I'm losing control of it, they can cause some damage actually as they try and wrestle their way back in.
And so is there ever situations where you sort of partner with the MD, and like the MD is, there's a lot of people I found, I'll take myself a perfect example. Like, I am not a natural managing director. I'm really good at certain things. But yeah, I know my limitations. I really do. I know my limitations, but like, I would never want to go and sort of back out the bit, because I enjoy it. I enjoy the things that I enjoy, sort of thing. But we've always toyed with the idea that, like, maybe that's something that we've got missing somewhere here, who's a little bit less detached, a bit more, dare I say it, organized, a little bit more structured, a little bit more process driven. So does that ever work where you sort of brought in to work with a founder as opposed to replacing the MD and sort of pushing them out?
Yeah, so I've done a number of assignments successfully like that. There was a company in Scotland, particularly, where I worked with the second generation MD and his brothers. And really, I guess the role I had was more interim COO. And I would go up once every fortnight, and I would spend some time with the leadership team, but one-to-one with the MD. And really, what the MD needed was accountability. So, and because it was a family business, that accountability is sometimes difficult to get when you have such strong personal relationships. Because the dynamic on that personal relationship sometimes means that feedback crosses a line from professionalism occasionally, or it's taken with a pinch of salt, and you know where family are going to cut you slack. So this worked particularly well. I mean, this was circa 13 million at the time, but the business model was lumpy. It was high value capital equipment, and they got a high amount of borrowing, high interest borrowing. So cash was the problem. And in the 12 months that I worked with this individual, we managed to actually both improve the EBITDA quite significantly, but more importantly, exit some, it was invoice factoring debt, so a high interest. We managed to invoice that facility because it's a great facility in the right place, but once you're on that treadmill, it's really hard to get off.
Rid of it.
Yeah. So we managed to exit that, and we actually added 500,000 of free cash back into the business, which just made it a lot easier because of the lumpy nature of the revenue. But that worked well because, I say, the majority of my time was one-to-one with the MD, coaching him. But what I had to do with that organisation particularly was get them to understand that as a family business, it's absolutely right for you to have an operational role in the business if you want one, but you need to understand when you're wearing your operational hat and when you're wearing your shareholder hat. Mm-hmm. And you only put your shareholder hat on at the monthly board meeting, management meeting, or at the off-site shareholder review meeting. You can't operate in a business with your shareholder hat on if you are there as the sales director and you're responsible for driving the sales and the marketing and holding the team accountable, and then you're looking over the shoulder at one of the other shareholders starting to throw grenades into that function because you're worried about your return. And it's a tricky road to navigate, but I think again it's about just articulating clearly, right, are you thinking as a shareholder right now, or are you thinking as the functional operational role that you have in the business? And just, can you take a pause to try and have that sanity check before you start throwing grenades around or criticism? Or so it's always an interesting one, that one, when you've got shareholders who are operational and multiple shareholders. But again, I've seen it done successfully, but it takes a discipline. I mean, and this is where you referenced it. This is where sometimes you need that external then MD or leader to come in to be able to chair and call people out on those behaviours and rein it in and just put some structure behind. Right, the right forum for that discussion is there. This discussion here and now is about this. Let's get it back on track.
I mean, what is it? Obviously, one of your fortes is going in, turn around distressed companies. I think you've been brought in a lot with private equity deals, and that they've brought you in to increase things. But what other scenarios would a company consider an interim MD, aside from, Rome's burning, shit, we need somebody to get us out of the mess?
Yeah, so sometimes it's when they're in a search for a perm. The recruitment market is tough, and it is, particularly when you're looking for that key leadership role, it's an important one to get right. So quite often I've seen, particularly private equity, they will bring in an interim whilst they can then conduct a thorough search for their perm full-time intended successor. And in that scenario, what they're after is a safe pair of hands, somebody who's really not going to rock the boat. And then, because I guess the challenge of that is it can be confusing for the employees. If you've got someone there in the short term who's making change, then you've got someone who comes in and says, right, I'm the future now. They're going to want to do their own thing, and that's understandable. The advantage of any interim, irrespective of the function, I guess, is they tend to be overqualified for the role that they're brought in to do. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that, it means there's very little onboarding other than setting IT up. The advantage of what we do is we can navigate our way around a business really quickly and get into the skin of it, and we tend to be self-starters because we're over-experienced for either the size of the business or the role that we're brought in to do at that moment.
When you're sort of working in private equity, that's there's mixed reports about the private equity world. What's it like working in it? Because my head, I just think of these sharks that are going to rip the eyeballs out and come back to the sockets. And I think that is a common perception of what a lot of people will think. But like, you know.
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience is I enjoy it. I think normally you've got some very skilled people, whether that's investment directors or managers, who are part of the board. So I think you get a lot of experience that you can draw on. I think the negative perception comes from the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs have not worked in corporate environments. And private equity companies tend to have that corporate background. You know, a lot of them have that background of tier one consultancy, you know, PwC, Boston Consulting Group kind of education and background, and a lot of them are MBA educated as well. So they have a language, and they have also seen quite a lot of best practice. And then they're acquiring a privately owned business most of the time that's been grown by a shareholder who's done it through knowledge of his product, knowledge of his market or her market, and their expertise and their hard work.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And suddenly they've now got this accountability, because the reality with private equity is they've acquired a business because they can see that it has the opportunity to create more value. They wouldn't be interested if it didn't have that, and they need to realize that value for their investors. So they can be demanding, but the majority of the time is they're willing to invest in realizing that value. They understand that value creation comes with investment, and also with having the right people on board. So when I say investment, that isn't necessarily, it's not an open checkbook, but they are willing to invest in systems, in solutions, in capital, in getting capable people into the business. But they need to know that they're going to realize that value. And as long as you're hitting the numbers that they expect, I find it to be a really positive and engaging environment. I think it's only natural that some of the pain comes when those numbers aren't being delivered, because
I think that's what I was going to come on to. Like let's say on 10 private equity deals, how many of them go on to, you know, it's a great relationship, everyone's making money, and how many fall flat on their arse?
I've not actually seen many fall flat, because these guys are skilled at the due diligence piece, and they go into it knowing what they expect from it. Occasionally they will have something which is underperforming, but again, they've invested in the acquisition. They don't like to give up on those things. They would rather see it turned around and realized. Now they might not realize it in the original timescales, and that does frustrate them. But again, they do want to realize the return on the investment, so they will give it the opportunity to demonstrate it can do that. I think what's changed the dynamic in recent years is what I've seen is private equity companies have paused their pipeline because of the high interest rates, the cost of borrowing. They've held longer and held positions a lot longer on things that they would have probably exited 3 to 5 years. But I've certainly seen evidence of longer holds now, 5 to 10 maybe in some instances. And as a result, what that means is they haven't been acquisitive, but I think we'll start to see that improve in 26.
So I'm going to sort of start to wind down the conversation now. So we've got a few quick fire questions. What's the one sentence you never want to hear in a turnaround situation?
We're going to run out of cash in the next few weeks.
And probably another follow-on to that is, aside from we're going to run out of cash a week on Friday, what other situations would cause you not to take a job?
It's rare that I've actually refused to take a job, but I think it comes down to my relationship with the shareholders or whoever is engaging me. If we can't have an open and candid relationship, then it's not going to work. One of the things I always insist on is that we have to be able to be open and honest, and I will call it as I see it. It's never judgment. It's never a personal attack. but it is honesty. So if they're not willing to hold the mirror up and truly look at the problems and some of the root causes, then yeah, that's not an engagement for me, because they're really not willing to address the issues.
Is there one book or resource you would gift to somebody you are mentoring to become a high-flying MD?
Yeah, I think one of the best experiences I had was the 3 years I had at a company called Danaher, which immersed me in lean methodologies. So I think verse yourself with some of the lean tools, because they're very good at getting to the root cause of problems and addressing things quickly.
Where can people find out more about you? You know, where can, if they want to get in touch, if they want to look at some of your stuff, obviously over on LinkedIn, where else can people find out about Jon Corns and what he does?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is the biggest shop window I've got. I'm also a part of CMC Business Advisors. So the CMC website, the best way of describing that is that's kind of like my non-exec roles for businesses that are too small to have a board. So I work with business owners on that basis as well, and you can see a lot of resources on the CMC Business Advisor website.
Thank you very much for joining us, and I'm gonna end the show there.
Brilliant, pleasure. Thanks, Chris. I've enjoyed speaking with you.